We try to use as much of the animal as possible. So since we got a half a cow from a local farmer, it was time to go ahead and process the bones into some beef broth. I will be pressure canning these, and I thought I'd bring you along for the process. My daughter was sick this weekend, so I hung out in my chicken pajamas and processed the bones. We started by getting the bones out and putting them in water and boiling them. I always use filtered water, which is why mine came in a glass pitcher. You also want to make sure your bones are completely covered in water. Now, they don't just boil for a little bit, they boil for a minimum of 4 hours. You want to get all of the good marrow and everything you can out of those bones. From there, we strained the bones. We want to go ahead and make sure that there's no fat in there. It is okay to go ahead and leave any meat chunks you want. Some people actually scrape the bones to get as much meat chunks back into the broth as they can. Once you've done that, you want to go ahead and get your broth back to boiling because you want it to be nice and hot to go into your jars. Now, the great thing about pressure canning is you do want really clean jars, but you don't have to do the sterilization process because that's going to happen while you're pressure canning. So pressure canning is not something I'm as well versed in as I am water bathing, but I've done it a few times that I'm starting to get the hang of it. For pressure canning bone broth, you want a 1-inch headspace, and I have a little funnel that indicates that for me. However, a lot of jars also, you can go by the rings, and the lowest ring is typically an inch headspace. So you're going to pour the broth in there while it's nice and hot. You're going to then place a clean lid. You do not reuse your lid. That is canning 101. I like to use a magnet to hold my lid on because then I'm not touching it and chancing contaminating the seal. Before you do put that ring on, though, I forgot to mention you do need to wipe down your jars. You can either use a wet paper towel, which is what I do, or some people use white vinegar. You just want to make sure there's no food residue on there because that will help the lid stick so much better. Once you do that, you're going to put on the ring, and you're just going to do that to fingertip tightness. So you're not going to do it with all of your strength and might, but it's not going to be super loose either. And then it's time to put the jars into the canner. Now, as far as canners go, there's a whole lot of different ones. For pressure canning, the water does not have to cover it. It just has a few inches in the bottom. However, my favorite is the All-American. It kind of takes the stress out of worrying about your canner exploding because I've seen those videos where people's canning lids have ended up in their ceiling, and I'm not all about that life. I have small kids and I want it safe, and All-American canners have the great benefit of having these clamps so you don't have to worry about the lid exploding. Plus, All-American canners are the only pressure canners I have seen without a seal. So then you're going to put it in there and you're going to put the lid on and you're going to let it vent. Vent means you want to see steady stream coming out of the little vent pipe for at least 10 minutes. When it's gone steady for 10 minutes, then you're going to want to put the weight on. I don't know why. The weight is always the scariest part for me. For my altitude and the size jars and everything I'm doing, it had to be at 10 pounds of pressure for 25 minutes. You watch the gauge rise, and when it gets to 10, it's going to start rattling a little bit. The weight is, you want it to rattle just like 1 to 4 times per minute. You don't want it to be spinning or rattling nonstop because that means that your temperature is actually way too high. Once you've got it up there rattling, I like to turn it down. For my stove, it tends to be like between a 3 and 4, and it keeps perfect pressure. Yours might be higher or lower. It's kind of something you have to mess with. And once you've got that constant pressure for 25 minutes, then you turn off the heat. You let the pressure fall. Once I take the weight down, I feel like it takes about another 10 minutes just to completely vent. And then you can take off the lid and pull your jars out. You want to set your jars on a towel.
I'm not sure the science behind this, but if you watch real closely, you can see that the broth kind of looks like a lava lamp as it cools. Something about the particles cooling, I don't know, but it freaked me out the first time, but now I think it's so cool.